Hey guys, Icy Cat here. This week sees the conclusion of the limited time PvE event Outbreak. But now that it's over, the question is whether or not this was a good thing or a bad thing for the game. Did it do what it set out to achieve in the first place? And most importantly, what comes next? Let's talk about all of it next. Just taking a look back, now that Outbreak has ended, it was a 4-week limited time duration event. It just concluded a couple of days ago, and it's time to kind of take a look at some of the things that it did both right and wrong. So let's start by taking a look at a few of the negative notes that Outbreak hit, at least in my opinion. The first of those is that it just didn't feel like Rainbow Six. This didn't feel like any kind of a Tom Clancy experience necessarily. It felt more like a Left 4 Dead game or something like that. And while it was fun to be able to play as some of the operators from the game and use them in a new way that we hadn't done before, it just didn't feel true to the Rainbow Six experience necessarily. Furthermore, it presented everything in kind of a jumbled story. The levels were presented in a random mishmash, and you never knew what you were doing or why you were doing it. The video cutscenes that were supposed to tie everything together were completely optional, that you would have to choose to play them in your own time frame. It wasn't part of the experience. There was no progression. It really should have been done in such a way that when you would start playing it, you'd begin with the first level, then you would get your cutscene, then you would do the next level, then you get your next cutscene, and it would have a story that everything would be linked together. Then maybe once you've completed the actual intended story arc one time, then maybe it could be randomized. Also, it didn't have the best challenges going for it. They were very grindy. Some of the ones that gave you charms weren't too bad. You'd maybe play on pandemic mode a couple of times, and then you would get the charm, and that was cool. But then you would have these ones where you'd have to kill 30 rooters or 15 smashers, and that can take a really, really long time. Now, granted, they made the renown reward bigger for that. It was 1,000 renown, which is a sizable chunk of change. But you also have to remember that maybe you're only running into, 3 of these things in any one playthrough of a map. And then if you get all of them in that map, then, you still have to do that 10 times. And it can take you 10 or 15 minutes to clear through one of these. And it is really grindy to ask players to go ahead and do that. So yeah, they did make a bigger renown reward for doing it, but I just don't know that kind of a grind necessarily did the mode any favors. The other thing I think Outbreak did really wrong was the Outbreak packs. So they were essentially RNG loot crates. You were asked to give your cash. You could only buy these with rainbow credits. You could not buy them with renown. So you were asked to spend your actual money in exchange for, you had no idea what, one of 50 things. You didn't know what it was you were going to get. Now, up until this time, between alpha packs and the setup of content in the game's shop, you have never been asked to blindly purchase anything. The alpha packs were always a gamble. You never knew what you were going to get, but you weren't paying actual money for them. Anything that you paid actual cash for, whether it was digital content for direct purchase of cash or using Rainbow Six credits that you purchased with money, you always were able to make an informed decision on what you were purchasing. Taking that out of the equation is a step that I do not want to see them do in the future. If they pursue any other kind of content like this, I would far prefer that they do informed purchasing decisions, just like all the other aspects of the game's shop content have been to this point. But I don't want to just harp on the negatives of it. There's also a lot of positives that came out with it. First of all, I was glad to see that there was finally new PvE content. I didn't actually think we would ever see new PvE content for this game. So it was definitely a nice surprise to see that they spent some time doing this. And one common complaint I've heard is that they wish that they wouldn't have done that and they would spend more time fixing the multiplayer, the PvP side of the game, rather than worrying about this PvE side. But what a lot of people seem to forget is that Ubisoft Montreal is the one that handles this game. The Montreal studio did not handle the Outbreak mode at all. They asked one of the in-house teams at Ubisoft Paris to handle this. So this was developed by a completely different dev team than handles the base game. No dev time from the Montreal team was spent working on this, so people really do need to remember that. Another cool thing is that it was just unique. Whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it, I at least have to give my hats off to Ubisoft for trying something innovative and fresh. Again, whether you liked it or not is a different question, but they tried something interesting. They did something unique. Another fresh spin that Outbreak gave us was that attackers and defenders for the first time got to play together as a cooperative unit. That was really cool to see. It also introduces some new features like the flashlight attachment and the various new refill stations for health or supplies, grenade loadouts, things like that we got a chance to encounter here that we haven't seen anywhere else before. For the new PvE content, that was a really interesting thing to see. I also think one of the other things that Outbreak really got right was these cool, huge scale maps. They were very big, very expansive, very detailed, and they had a lot of different points where maybe you would have to go through one certain area, but then it would open up and allow you to take multiple routes. You could go through certain rooms, or maybe on your next approach, you would go through other completely different rooms to get to that same area. And there were certain points where you just had to go through a certain section to be sure, but it gave a little bit of non-linearity to it that I really enjoyed. So now that it's over, will we ever see this mode come back? That is the million-dollar question. Nobody really knows for sure. Ubisoft hasn't actually announced any official plans for this mode to return. They did say it was a limited 4-week only thing, and that's all it was going to be. However, it seems really hard to believe that they would spend this much time on it, that they would ask an entire Ubisoft studio over in Paris to spend a year working on this content, and then only to be around for 4 weeks and disappear. It feels like there's a bigger picture that we're not seeing, and we may see it return in a consecutive season. Maybe not this next season, maybe it'll be maybe around season 3 or something. Who knows? We might see this mode return. Maybe it'll come back as it is, or maybe it'll come back with some tweaks or some changes. And of course, maybe it won't come back at all. I just find it really hard to believe that this much time and effort would be invested into something that you only see for 1 month and then never see again. But do we even want to see Outbreak come back again? Like I said, one of the things about it was that it just didn't feel very Rainbow Six. Now, some people really loved Outbreak and had some fun with it, and I admit, I had some fun with it, even though it didn't feel like Rainbow Six to me. But what else could they do that might be more in keeping with the feeling of actual Rainbow Six? Well, one thing to do would be to actually recreate situations that were operator specific and would sort of delve into the lore of that character. We've been seeing the dev team spending more time crafting the individual operators' stories as they're kind of rolled out with every new consecutive season. Having a chance to experience those operators getting a bit of a chance to shine in their own kind of custom missions would be a great way to help explore that further. One of the things I think back to is the first time that Operation Black Ice was initially launched, they had this image that showed the top of the ship and Frost and Buck together approaching that ship to check it out. And it always made me wonder, okay, this picture shows them going up to this, they're going to go on a mission together to deal with the terrorists that are there. But what happens next? And we never really get a chance to find out because they never actually work together in the game, even though the promo art seemed to show that they were. Having some kind of interaction like that, it was custom tailored to all the operators within that given CTU working together. I mean, something like that would be really, really cool. And maybe while they're doing it, there would be certain aspects of it that could highlight their specific operator abilities, or maybe there would be certain things that would occur in the level, whether it's character dialogue or cutscenes or things like that, that would help sort of reinforce the story dynamics between these characters and their backgrounds. This would obviously need to take a completely new direction from the currently existing situations that are in the game. Those are set up to kind of walk a first-time player through the game, get them used to step-by-step how to play the various elements of the game. This wouldn't be that hand-holding experience. This would be more for actually having some kind of story elements. I'd love to see them find more ways to combine attackers and defenders because it was so fun to be able to play with operators having Doc and Lion on the same team working together. But I think rather than doing the Outbreak style of things, I would like to see them do more realistic content. Those military situations or those law enforcement situations, going in, saving the hostage, defusing the bomb, whatever it might be, mixing those modes up in ways, but having the team all sort of work together. I also like the way that Outbreak went with these big, huge maps. I mean, how cool would it be to actually have a proper modern military scenario instead of the aliens or zombies, having actual soldiers out there and, you have to deal with, getting into a facility and extracting some information and then getting back out again. And it's a more realistic current scenario that you might find these operators actually engaging in. Many of the operators' backstories do talk about how they were on, this certain operation, codenamed this or codenamed that. How cool would it be to go on some of those backstories that the bios directly reference? What was this mission? What was that codenamed operation? How did that go down? It references it, but what was the experience like? It would be great to find out. But what if we didn't even go into these crazy huge downloads of really big content of these expansive maps? What if we just kind of worked with what was already in the game, and that's the terrorist hunt? What if we did something like an enhanced terrorist hunt? How could we take what we already have and make that interesting? Well, if anything Outbreak has shown us is, again, working together with attackers and defenders is a really fun and interesting dynamic. And I think that would be great to see. There's definitely some things where maybe you wouldn't even think an operator could be useful, but it actually could be. Some people might think that like taking Castle along on a hostage rescue would be sort of a useless thing to do if you're on the attacking team. Why would you want that Castle? Well, maybe you can just throw up those barricades behind as you go so that you're not getting flanked. Another thing that would be really interesting to see is if you could get new AI skins for enemies, or maybe just new enemies completely. Think about how cool a terrorist hunt would be on Clubhouse with bikers and attack dogs. So that would be like a new enemy type. You would have the attack dogs. I just think of that because outside of the clubhouse, there is the kennels section and you can hear the dogs barking. So maybe having to deal with a few of those, maybe the bikers could even have them on like a leash and, sort of like let them loose on you when they see you. Again, maybe just have a couple of those. And the bikers themselves wouldn't necessarily be that different from the terrorists that we have already. It would just be like a new skin, but it would allow you to at least see something that was visually different. It would feel distinct for that level and it would be interesting to play. The white masks are such a terrible enemy to play against. First of all, they're wearing all gray. They blend in with everything. They're so drab and boring. Let's give these things some visual appeal. So maybe when you play a terrorist hunt on Oregon, you are encountering a whole bunch of rednecks. Or maybe they're not even necessarily map specific, but perhaps there's AI skins that you can choose to apply. So maybe it's just guys that are dressed in like generic suits and ties with sunglasses and there's no real identity to them and they can be on any map, or maybe like the biohazard suit that the bomber wears is cool. Well, what if maybe the white biosuits were for the bombers and then like the regular terrorists would have the yellow biohazard suits? Again, it doesn't change anything about like how they behave, but it would just add an interesting feature to like, oh, when I'm playing this map or these certain maps, maybe it has a flavor to it that feels new and fresh and invigorating. Then there's the concept of traps. I think everybody gets annoyed by finding the room of like 40 C4 or 40 barbed wire. That's sort of not something we want to see. But running into the random nitro cell here and there, or the random barbed wires here and there, that is actually something that's good because it makes you slow down and think about your approach. You just don't want to run into like a cluster of 40 of them. But what about also having other trap types, just one or two here and there throughout the map? It doesn't even have to be new traps. It can be already existing ones. What if the terrorists could place down claymores? Or what if they could throw smoke gas grenades, or at least have them pre-placed? What about Kapkan's laser trip mines? There's all kinds of things that if the terrorists use against us could really spice things up. And like I stressed, you don't want to run into a room with 40 of these things, make sure that that can't happen, but have a couple of these sprinkled throughout a level, and that might keep things kind of interesting too. Also, having a way to turn off the bombers would be really great because people, when they play this mode, don't necessarily want to be dealing with the bombers. And some people, maybe they want to try a map that has all bombers and they just want to go for some nutsy challenge like that. Other people, they just don't want to deal with that when they play. They just want to do, straight up like warming up their aim and just trying to get used to playing the game. Give us an option to turn those things on and off and change the settings. The last thing I think it would be important to see them make a change to regarding Terrorist Hunt is figuring out a way to increase the amount of renown you get for playing that mode. I know that at the time there was a bunch of people that figured out how to hack the game for like 50,000 renown a day or 100,000 renown a day or whatever, and they were doing things that were kind of, making it so that there was almost like this black market of renown, and then they would use it to buy all kinds of cosmetic gear. But honestly, there's gotta be a way to do it that's better than just giving you 36 renown for play one of these terrorist hunts. It needs to be worth our time a little bit more than that. Sure, you can still get more renown if you unlock a challenge while you do it, but unless you're doing that, you're only getting 36 renown for doing a terrorist hunt, and that's just pathetic. There's gotta be a better way for them to figure out how to implement it so that we can get that renown that we're supposed to be getting, while still figuring out a way to make it so that it can't be farmed in those other ways. There's just gotta be some kind of a way to make that happen. So now that Outbreak is over, what do you guys think? Was it something you had a lot of fun with, or are you kind of glad to see it go? What do you think might come next? Will Outbreak return, or would you like to see them do something else that's more in a modern military flavor if they do try to explore more PvE content? Let me know down in the comments below, or share with me over at IcyCat25 on either Facebook or Twitter. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe. Make sure you click that notification icon so you're alerted as soon as I upload new content. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.